Welcome to the Salt and Light Council. My name is Dran Reese, and I am your host for our lecture series tonight, and our guest is David Kupelian. David Kupelian is one of my heroes, and I have to say that he has written books that in my life are bookends. The very first one was The Marketing of Evil, which outlined to me the 12 issues undermining our Christian culture, which for all of us should still be today read, and I highly recommend that you read it. And then he did another bookend called The Snapping of the American Mind, which we are going to talk about tonight. But David Kupelian is a best-selling author. He's managing editor of the online news giant WorldNetDaily.com. I love them, and if you don't know them, now's your time to sign up and get to know them. He is a widely read online columnist, and he's a driving force behind the monthly news magazine Whistleblower. And I subscribe to Whistleblower magazine, and it's really the only magazine you need to read to have a thorough education on the topics that it brings forward. And we'll go over that a little bit later on. Again, he wrote the books Marketing of Evil, How Radicals, Elitists, and Pseudo-Experts Sell Us Corruption Disguised as Freedom. And he has one of the most controversial and hot-selling books right now, and it's called How Evil Works. That's his other book. But tonight, again, we are going to talk about the snapping of the American mind. And now you're going to know him because you're going to see him on different television shows like Fox News, Hannity, and Your World with Neil Cavuto, and even Tucker Carlson now. Not to mention he travels in the Christian circuit with Coral Ridge Hour and the 700 Club. He is fearless, and you know he's fearless because all of the radical groups out there have him on their list. But he's a wonderful, wonderful man. I've had a great opportunity to get to know him, and I hope you love David Kupelian as much as I do. So, David, you just tell me how you want to go from here. This is the very first slide that I put up, and I numbered them. 1 is the magazine, 2 are your books, 3 are your articles on Facebook, and all of those are live, and we can go right to those places if you'd like.
Why don't we go to the series on the snapping book? I think the first one said Bizarro America. Do you remember that one?
Sure, let's go right to the slides.
There we go. Okay, so first of all, Dran, thank you for that wonderfully dramatic and largely undeserved introduction. But I am honored to be here. This is the real America that we all love and remember. Still alive. There's some of us still around, and I don't want to scare anybody with the snapping of the American mind. It's kind of a downer of a title, I guess, for a book. And the first chapter doesn't help. It's called Bizarro America. And the theme of it is basically that everything that we knew and loved when we were kids has been turned upside down. And anybody who's read the book knows that ultimately it's a very redemptive book. In fact, the subtitle is Healing a Nation Broken by a Lawless Government and Godless Culture. And that's really what it's about. But, you got to define the problem first before you get to the solution. So I'm just going to kind of run through it pretty quickly. I know everybody on this call is smart and committed to helping the country. They're very, very aware of the news and what's going on in the world. So I'm just going to hit some highlights, and then we can get to, what we can do about it. But, the first chapter, Bizarro America, the whole idea was that the American, I'm in my 60s, so I grew up in the 1950s. And what a beautiful, united, basically happy, self-confident country it was. And so people who are downers say, yeah, but you had like racial segregation back then. Yeah, I know. Okay. And today we like rip apart 3,000 beautiful little babies every single day. So knock it off with that. Okay. Every generation has its blindness. And we had our blindness in the 1950s. And basically, since I'm frankly sick of talking about racism because it's largely not even real in America. America is the least racist nation on the face of the earth in all of history, and everybody knows it. The great American middle class basically changed its mind about segregation in the 1960s, and the great, powerful American middle class bought into Martin Luther King's dream of, a colorblind America, that we will be judged by the content of our character, not the color of our skin. So this is all just a tactic and a weapon of the left, as everybody on this call knows. But other than the segregation, this was like a near perfect country in the 1950s. And so now, I mean, just look, we were talking about this 45-foot naked woman on the Smithsonian Mall in Washington, D.C. I mean, what? I grew up in Washington, D.C. I went down to the mall all the time, the Natural History Museum, all these wonderful museums are all free. And now I have to go look at some like naked 45-foot woman? I don't think so. Today there was a big news story about the Drag Queen Story Hour, where they have these cross-dressing transgender people that read stories to your kids in the public library. We're talking 3-4-year-olds there. And I commented on Facebook that, what we're really doing is conditioning these kids to be comfortable with demons and with people who are possessed or oppressed, however you want to call it, by demonic entities. But this is not a good thing. So that's just in the news. But in the first chapter of The Snapping of the American Mind, I go through, I'll just hit a couple highlights. I mean, I talked about, there was a 13-year-old girl named Taryn Hathaway in Salinas, California. She drew a picture of an American flag with the words, "God bless America" on it. And her art teacher told her that was offensive. That this was offensive. And this became a national news story. I think Hannity had it on, and we covered it on WorldNet Daily. The mainstream media probably thought it was great, But anyway, it's like, what, really? How can a American flag with the words "God bless America," reverently written by a little girl, how can that be offensive? I can't even conceive in my mind how anybody can find that as offensive. And then I talk about Blake Gopnik, who was the chief art critic for the Washington Post, and how he was defending this, art exhibit at the National Portrait Gallery in D.C. by this homosexual artist, David Wojnarowicz. And it's a film about a crucifix. It has a crucifix with Christ and has ants crawling over Jesus's body. It is the creepiest thing I've ever seen. It would make you run screaming from the room if you had to watch it for 5 seconds. But he thought it was great. And this exhibit also featured, the usual stuff: male sex organs, naked brothers kissing, men in chains, and all that kind of stuff. But in the meantime, the Post's chief art critic, he says he hates, his word, he hates Norman Rockwell. Now, I grew up, Norman Rockwell, the pictures of the family around the dining table at Thanksgiving praying, the man standing up at the meeting. It's quintessential Americana, okay? So, I could go on, but, the clock is ticking. I think everybody here, you could come up with your own examples. You say, what is going on in this country we love? One other example I mentioned in the first chapter about Obama, Barack Obama. By the way, did you notice that before the election, it was something really bad to say his middle name, because Hussein is a Muslim middle name. Okay, so to say Barack Hussein Obama, you were considered to be racist or anti-Muslim or something. But as soon as he was elected, everywhere he went, it's Barack Hussein Obama. It suddenly became like a great thing. I never figured that out. But anyway, Barack Hussein Obama, he in 2009, his Department of Homeland Security issued a report describing the main terror threat to America. Does anybody remember this? I know you can't answer, okay, but I'm sure some of you remember it. It described so-called right-wing extremists, okay, and so examples of them were people who claimed they were constitutionalists, or who voiced concerns over illegal immigration, or who championed the Second Amendment, had an NRA bumper sticker, who were pro-lifers, or especially returning war veterans. I remember Ollie North wrote a column in the Washington Times called "I Am an Extremist," because he said basically, I'm guilty of all these things. I'm a Christian, I have Bible study, I do target practice, I don't think illegal immigration is a great thing to fill our country up with millions of people who hate it. And he said, apparently all this makes me a, quote, right-wing extremist. And that was according to the 2009 report from the Department of Homeland Security. There was such a pushback, they retracted that report. But you have to say, what the heck is going on in DHS? So anyway, I'm going to move on. Oh, wait a minute, one more thing. Obama, because I have a bullet point here saying how Obama moved everything to the left. Okay, I hope it doesn't sound like I'm all like wired up talking too fast. I'm actually very relaxed. I'm just talking fast because I know we have limited time here, and I just want to get through a lot of interesting things. Barack Obama, I grew up in the aerospace industry. My father was Ronald Reagan's Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Strategic and Theater Nuclear Forces, Vahe Kupelian. He was also the Army's chief scientist for ballistic missile defense. So I grew up with all this ballistic missile defense, high-performance ballistic missile defense technology, all that stuff. I loved all that. NASA, I was as proud as anybody when we had the first space shuttle landed. So Obama, when he becomes president, he puts his new NASA chief, Charles Bolden, in charge. And Bolden, in his own words, said, quote, when I became the NASA administrator, President Obama charged me with three things. And I'll skip the first two, but he said third, he said the most important, quote, foremost, he wanted me to find a way to reach out to the Muslim world and engage much more dominantly with Muslim nations to help them feel good about their historic contribution to science, math, and engineering. Okay, I'll give you a minute if anybody fainted. Okay, see, like when I was young, it was like, let's go to the moon, let's go to Mars, let's put big telescopes up in space, find out what's going on, let's do all this great stuff in space. And Obama is like, let's reach out to the Muslim world and tell them how great they are, because they are why we have science and math and engineering. So that was my first of 10 chapters, just laying out, folks, Houston, we have a problem. There is a big problem in Washington. And so now the rest of the book is to explain what happened and what we can do about it. So I'm not going to go through every chapter. We don't have time. But Dran and I talked about this last week. I said, let's talk about chapter 2, which is called The Blur. Okay, I like the blur. And basically what I'm saying, it's a metaphor that we've been living in a blur since the 1960s. I lived through it, okay? I was a stupid, idiotic hippie for a while, okay? I was one of those people that grew up. I had long hair and took drugs and all that. So, but this is what we remember about the 1960s. People grew long hair and took drugs, and we had rock music and LSD. But that wasn't the important part. That was just a bunch of lost souls that got swept up in something. Okay, what was really going on is that our nation, unbeknownst to most people, had come under a withering assault from radical revolutionary movements with very appealing names like women's liberation, black liberation, sexual liberation, gay liberation, animal liberation, multiculturalism, but it was literally like a blur. We did not know what we were looking at, where it was coming from, and where it was taking us. And, we had other signs. Something was wrong. We knew that our families were all breaking apart in divorce. We had, insane Supreme Court decisions, banning prayer in schools, but forcing states to legalize the killing of unborn babies. And there was a major upsurge in atheism and exotic religious cults, and a very much, egregious coarsening of our culture, ever increasing sexual anarchy, which was led by this really explosion of angry, well organized homosexual activists that demanded what ultimately has turned out to be a complete reordering of Western culture and morality and law. And so then I go into basically my retelling of the Frankfurt School. I'm sure everybody on this call knows about this. They've heard about it. And essentially, I'll just put it into a nutshell. Karl Marx, our wonderful friend Karl Marx, he predicted a worldwide revolution of all the workers were going to they were all going to, in every country, they're going to throw off the evil factory owners and sing the Internationale together, and we're all going to have a happy communist world. Well, that didn't happen, except sort of in Russia, sort of. Marx, what he predicted was wrong, and his true believer followers, who of course they were true believers, so they couldn't give up on what Marx said, but they figured out he was wrong about one thing. There was one thing standing in the way of the great Marxist worldwide revolution, and that was a thing called Christianity. All those workers did not rise up in revolution because their souls had been saturated in 2,000 years of Christianity, and that blinded them to their true class interests in Marx's viewpoint. So what instead of having a violent revolution, the idea was to have a gradual cultural revolution. You all have heard this expression from the Marxist Antonio Gramsci, the Italian Marxist, who said we're going to have a long march through the institutions. And basically he said we're going to take over the culture bit by bit, the arts, movies, theater, schools, colleges, seminaries, newspapers, magazines, and what was then the new electronic medium called radio. Okay, now we've got of course TV and internet, but one by one these had to be captured and converted and politicized into an agency of revolution. And that is what they did. And they did it really well, I have to say. But I don't know if people realize how absolutely perverse this was. One of these guys was Herbert Marcuse, who he was one of these, these communists in the Frankfurt School. He wrote a delightful book called Eros and Civilization, in which case he advocated the universal adoption of the pleasure principle. And he argued against Judeo-Christian culture, and what he wanted instead, are you ready for this? He wanted something called polymorphous perversity, that would take over. Doesn't that sound like a basis for a really good culture and family life? I just think that just sounds so, us troglodytes, we had, the Ten Commandments and the Sermon on the Mount, and we thought that was going to be the basis of a good society and a strong family. How stupid we were. Along comes Herbert Marcuse, who says, no, what you want is polymorphous perversity. He is the guy who made up the expression. I hope everybody knows I was being just a little bit facetious there. He made up the expression, make love, not war. Remember that? If you were alive during the 60s, I remember I had a button in high school, a little button, make love, not war. I had no idea that I was carrying forward the agenda of a filthy old Marxist revolutionary. I just thought it was like kind of a cool button, So anyway, difficult as this all is to believe, many decades ago, influential Marxist revolutionaries, they really did conspire to slowly extinguish the most beautiful culture and religion that this world has ever known. The American society, with its Judeo-Christian culture, and they also want to basically extinguish the nuclear family, because the nuclear family is what cherishes and nurtures and reproduces this culture. I didn't make this up, but the nuclear family is the basic cellular unit of our society. So this is what Obama really had in mind when he talked about, the fundamental transformation of America, and in our blindness, we elected him twice. So Dran, I don't know how we're doing on time, and there's a lot more to say, but in the interest of not running out of time, before I say something that I think is really, really useful, and I think most people, even on this call, as clued into these things as you are, you may not have thought of things this way. So I talked to Dran about this, and I wrote a major column about this last year, about the 10 Commandments, which I just mentioned, and how the left, actually, you know what, let's do a thought experiment. You know how Albert Einstein did thought experiments? Anybody knows about Einstein? He kind of, just in his imagination, make things happen. He figured out relativity by doing certain things that only could be done in the mind. They didn't even have computer graphics then. But he had to, in his mind, figure some things out. Let's do a thought experiment. Let's not use the names left and right, Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, just for a few moments, okay? It is possible to look out the window at, let's say, a tree and not say tree. You can just see this magnificent thing coming out of the ground and, going up in the air, and then it kind of like fans out in these smaller branches, okay? And depending on what kind of tree it is, it has these marvelous little things coming out of it. You don't have to say the word tree. You can just see what it is kind of with fresh eyes without looking through your intellect and your memory. That's what I'm going for here. So let's forget about left and right just for a couple minutes. Okay. There is a worldview. There is a huge movement of people that have something in common. And let's describe what they have in common. Okay. Let's look at the 10 Commandments. And, as you know, the first 5 commandments kind of have to do with man's relationship with God. But the last 5 we're going to talk about have to do with man's relationship with his fellow man, like thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, and so forth. Let's just look at it really quickly, just a couple minutes. Thou shalt not kill or commit murder. I mentioned before we have abortion. We have 3,000 beautiful little human babies. This is the most sacred thing, as far as I know, that there is in the universe. Not talking about God and angels and all that, but as far as what we know in our life, an innocent child is, we all put like the highest value. We sacrifice our lives for children, okay? So we kill 3,000 of these every single day. This is something that was introduced to us and legalized by this worldview that we're not going to put a label on. Next commandment, thou shalt not commit adultery. Okay, the entire sexual revolution. We have unbelievable sexual anarchy today. It is simply beyond belief what we have today with the whole transgender world, where you can literally, by the way, there in California, you can go to jail for refusing to use the right transgender pronoun for somebody. Okay? You cannot go to jail, well, actually, you can go to jail for a shorter period of time for intentionally giving somebody AIDS. But if you refuse to use the correct pronoun, and there are 50 or 60 different genders now, okay, this is, we all agree, complete madness. It's madness. That's not a metaphor. I mean, in a clinical, DMS way. I'm not a psychiatrist, okay, but I've been writing about this. I've written 3 books about this subject. This is like clinically insane. that we're turning boys into girls and girls into boys and inventing new genders. It's all madness. All of that stuff, the whole gay rights movement, the LGBT alphabet soup thing, that all came from this same worldview. And when I say thou shalt not commit adultery, when you break the sacredness of sex, what does that thou shalt not commit adultery mean? Sex is sacred. It's sacred. It's intended for marriage only. Period. And all these horrible problems we have today, abortion and 110 million people with sexually transmitted diseases. Did you hear me? 110 million Americans with the sexually transmitted diseases. All these problems would go back into Pandora's box if we didn't break the seventh commandment. But the group that led that is this, I'm not giving a label on it, okay? Thou shalt not steal. Well, there's one group that corresponds to one of our political parties that believes that redistributing wealth is the primary function of the federal government. Barack Obama left that. Or maybe I shouldn't have said Obama. I'm kind of giving up which party. I'm sure you were wondering which party I was talking about, right? Well, so this whole business of stealing from one and giving to the other, okay, that is a product of this particular worldview, okay? What about thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor? There is one group that is forever calling everybody else a racist. Or, there's really nothing worse today than being a racist. It's almost like being a racist is worse than being a murderer. Being accused of being a racist. There's very little that's lower than that today. But all day long, this one group is calling people who just don't agree with it a racist, a hater, a bigot, a homophobe. You're Islamophobic. You're transphobic. They make up new words. There aren't enough bad words to describe people. They make up. You're biphobic. I'm a wordsmith. Okay, I've been a journalist for 35 years. I learned new words from these people I never knew existed before. So that is bearing false witness against thy neighbor. This one group is doing it. And the last one is thou shalt not covet. The great Winston Churchill referred to this unnamed group as, quote, as its worldview as, quote, the gospel of envy. Okay, that is a very pregnant phrase. It's a religion, okay, of envy. As you think about it, here's how I think about envy. We're human beings. We're born in sin. We have all these problems. We have good side to us and there's a bad side to us. The Ten Commandments and the Sermon on the Mount, the reason they're good is because they encourage everything that's good about us, okay? So what is this other unnamed, I'm getting kind of where I'm sick of this and I need to start talking about it. Okay, I'm breaking my silence now. We're talking about socialism, the left, Churchill's quote was socialism is the gospel of envy. It's thou shalt not covet, which is basically envy, okay? It is literally encouraging and institutionalizing everything that is low and loathsome about human nature. Covetousness, envy, the whole adultery thing, wanting, it's basically lust, okay? Greed. Everything that is dark and bad about human nature is institutionalized and glorified by the left. That's the problem with the left. And when I say left, I hope you know I'm not talking about good liberals like my dad was, okay? He loved this country, okay? I'm talking about the hardcore left, hates America. It's basically, and now I got to get to the bottom line, it's basically in rebellion against God. If you're confused about anything, what is going on here, okay? If you say, wait, where does God fit into this? That is really where, that clarifies things. Oh, yeah, this group is completely going against the Ten Commandments, the basically common sense, because God said, I will write my laws in your hearts. It's not just a plaque on the wall. I think when I was a little kid, somebody stole some money from me. I knew that it was wrong. I didn't know about the Ten Commandments. I still somehow knew stealing was wrong because the laws of God are written in our heart. Dran, I don't know. There's a bunch more. I can whip through it. You want to give me a sense of how we're doing on time here?
Well,
there's a lot of really cool stuff. I can keep going.
Sure. Well, it's fantastic. I'm really enjoying it. Here's what I'm going to say. You still have three more slides or 4 more slides maximum. Why don't we just say, folks? Normally I don't go over time, but it was my mistake to start with. I disconnected us. I apologize. But not only that, I absolutely love David, and I would like to get as much out of him as possible. So why don't we say that we will end the call at 10 minutes after 7, and then there'll be question and answer. So we'll just go an extra 10 minutes. So that gives you another 16 minutes.
All right, great. I'll have another Red Bull, and I'll speed up. No, actually, I never touched this stuff. So there's 10 chapters in the book, and everyone is going through a different area of hell, of what is being done to our beloved country. But there's one that I think is kind of interesting. I'll skip over several chapters. So there's a chapter called Magic Words. I thought this is basically based on 1984, and a lot of people read 1984 in high school and they thought, wow, what a crazy thing that people could believe. Remember, they had the what do they call it? The Ministry of Truth. This was about a total surveillance state called Oceania. Okay, and they had the Ministry of Truth. That was the headquarters for propaganda and revisionist history. They called it Ministry of Truth. And on the walls, everybody remembers this. There were these big phrases of the political party ruling there, and it was said, war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength, okay? And anybody reading this, you're a high school kid, you think like, man, how stupid. How could people be so stupid to think that freedom is slavery and war is peace? They must have really been confused. Yeah, okay, so let's look at America today, okay? I go through this in the Snapping book, and I just make up a few 1984 style slogans to see if they fit. We have, theft is justice. Okay, this is what, the whole social justice movement is about. Okay, envy is righteousness. We just talked about that. Faith is ignorance. Okay, all you Christians are just basically, stupid, ignorant, racists, and you're dangerous, and we need to take power away from you. That is the view of the left toward the Christian world. How about these? Morality is bigotry. Remember Kim Davis, county clerk that spent 5 days in jail because she didn't want to put her name as a county clerk on a same-sex marriage license? Okay? Her morality was bigotry. Sin is love. Well, yeah, basically what used to be called in the Bible vile affections, there's no vile anymore. Whatever, we have intergenerational sex. They is the name for adult-child sex now. There's a euphemism for everything. Let's just, this is kind of fun, okay? We have, ever since we've heard about like political correctness, we keep hearing, wow, everybody's offended by everything. So deaf people become hearing impaired. The blind are vision impaired. Crippled people are mobility impaired. Bums are homeless. Gangs become youth groups. Jungles are rainforests. Impotence becomes erectile dysfunction, or even ED. That makes it even better. Sorry about that. But I mean, we're just inundated with this stuff, right? A sex change operation is now gender reassignment surgery. Everything is, you can kind of laugh this chapter because this is kind of a fun thing. But the dark side of this is that bad, ignoble qualities become disguised and excused. You see, illegal aliens become illegal immigrants, and then they become undocumented immigrants. Well, poor guy, he just lost his documents. Okay, then they become undocumented workers. And President Obama in 2015, he started referring to illegal aliens in the U.S. as Americans in waiting. I think that wins the prize. That wins the prize for the euphemism for illegal aliens. But it actually gets pretty bad. Prostitutes are sex workers, homosexuals are gay, atheists are brights, abortion advocates are pro-choice. Every euphemism converts a negative into a positive, and it can get really ugly. A lot of people today refer to pedophiles as, quote, minor attracted persons, or MAPs. Child sexual abuse, I mentioned a minute ago, is intergenerational sex. And Islam is full of these awesome euphemisms. The popular euphemism for raping children is child marriage, and adultery and even rape are commonly called, are you ready for this, temporary marriage. I kid you not. You rape somebody and it's temporary marriage. During the rape, you were married to them, so it was okay. I am not making this up. I am a journalist. I am just bringing you the news. But you really have to understand and appreciate that part of the way the left has so spectacularly transformed America is its control of language. Fundamental things, equality. Thomas Jefferson, the Declaration of Independence, says, all men are created equal, endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights. Well, equality has been totally redefined. I remember writing in The Marketing of Evil about Ingrid Newkirk, the founder of PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. She famously told a reporter for Vogue magazine, this is a quote, she says, "There is no rational basis for saying that a human being has special rights. A rat is a pig, is a dog, is a boy." Okay. Now, we are talking about somebody that's the head of an organization that claims 3 million members, saying that a boy is no different from a rat. Okay, so that is what has happened to equality in the hands of the left. I mentioned justice. Justice has been completely defined. Justice used to mean justice, fairness, okay? But now what they do is they put a modifier: social justice, economic justice. We have all these justice movements like, environmental justice, climate justice, reproductive justice, transgender justice. Okay, did you ever stop and think what you're doing when you add a modifier to it? You're actually twisting justice into injustice. Okay, so the whole chapter is a lot of fun. I go into the whole. I discovered something I don't think I'd ever seen anyplace else before. But I went through all of Mao Zedong's writing. Remember Mao, the wonderful person who was the greatest mass murderer in the history of the entire known universe? 45 million people in 4 years during China's Great Leap Forward. If you do the math, that is over 30,000 people per day, every day for 4 years. We just had a mass murder that was horrible in Las Vegas. 58 people, okay? And then a lot more were shot. Okay, we're talking about 30,000 murdered per day, every day for 4 years. I don't know about you, but I can't even comprehend that, okay? And this is somebody who Barack Obama's White House communications director, Anita Dunn, publicly said on video, you can see it on YouTube at the Sidwell Friends, that Mao Zedong was one of her favorite political philosophers. Okay, this is how truly insane the leadership has been. And I don't want to run out of time before I say that I believe God Almighty had his hand in the last election and spared us Hillary Rotten Clinton from becoming president of the United States. And if you ever have any problem with Donald Trump, just remember turn on a YouTube video and listen to Hillary Clinton talk for about 30 seconds and just say, oh my God in heaven, I could have been listening to that voice for 4 years. So I'm sure a lot of people, your phones are muted, but I think a lot of people are probably saying amen right now. So I go into a whole thing explaining political correctness, where it came from. It is Marxist and totalitarian in origin. That is not my opinion. That's where it came from. And that is what is controlling our country, at least on the campuses, the whole elite establishment, the country. My clock says we have about 8 minutes left. I have a couple chapters in The Snapping of the American Mind about addiction and about drugs. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to summarize. This is actually very sad. We have a country of about 330 million people, men, women, and children. We have, just take a breath and think about this. We have over 100 million people in America that are dependent on mind-altering substances just to get through life. That is simply a staggering number. And when I'm talking about 25 million are taking illegal drugs, cocaine, heroin, so forth, 60 million with the drinking problem, and 50 million are on psych meds. I'm talking anti-anxiety drugs, SSRI, antidepressants. 1 in 4 middle-aged American women right now, 23%, is taking antidepressants. Those numbers actually add up to 130 million. I'm allowing for overlap, that some are in both categories, and so I'm being conservative and saying 100 million. That is simply staggering. Oh, by the way, of those, 30 million admit to driving under the influence of alcohol and 10 million to driving under the influence of drugs. People, we have 40 million people in America per year driving under the influence. 40 million. It's unbelievable that we're not just like running into each other all the time out there. So there's a great deal of stuff that is original that I have simply not seen anywhere else. I'm not bragging. I'm appalled that nobody else talks about it. There is a convergence between legal and illegal, and I'm not just talking about marijuana. I'm saying that more and more people are taking the same drugs for the same types of problems. Why do you take drugs? Because you're in pain. If you don't have pain, physical pain, psychic, mental, emotional pain, if you don't have pain, you're not taking drugs. Okay? People are taking them whether they get the drugs from a pusher or from a doctor. More and more, they are taking the exact same drugs for the same problems and the same reasons, to deaden the same pain, to make life tolerable. And I am a big critic of the psychiatric profession because it is secular and it is not in touch with the reasons for all these things. We keep hearing about the opioid crisis. 200,000 American lives have been lost since 1999 due to opioid deaths. Well, people had pain before this period of time. It's not just because the drugs are coming in from Mexico. It is a complex problem. There are a lot of different moving parts to it. But people that know that there is a good God and that there is a magnificent way out of this life through Christ, people who have a genuine, deep walk with God, okay? I'm not saying they're perfect, and I'm certainly not saying I'm perfect, okay? But people where that is not just an idea, they go to church, blah, 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 but where that is really real, that is the most important thing in their life, they are not strung out on drugs, and they are not committing suicide. They may have real issues and family issues and so forth, but they got something really strong going for them. And this is what is getting sucked out of our country. We are kind of basically a post-Christian country, excluding you guys, okay? But I'm saying, look, half of America is appalled at what's going on. I'm kind of winding up now. Okay, half of America is in horror at what they see, but that's good because it's horrible what's going on, and you should be horrified by it. It's the people that think it's wonderful, and Trump is Hitler, and we really needed Hillary. These are the people that I'm worried about. Okay, but we there is hope. I guess I should take the last couple of minutes and go. I'm going to skip over the gender madness chapter here. Everybody knows it's insane. There are not 56 different genders. There are two. I think it's male and female, right? Same ones as when we were kids, right? So that's about that. An anorexic who looks in the mirror and she's really skinny, but she thinks she's fat. She's not fat. She needs help. She doesn't need us to play along and pretend she's fat. It's the same thing with the person who's a male and looks in the mirror and sees a female. This is how I start the gender madness chapter. It is a mental illness that we are enabling and glorifying in our country now. It is really serious, and its main targets are Christians, because Christians are the people that stand up to this and saying, excuse me, I love everybody, but you are insane, and I can't play along with this. I can't sign your marriage license. I can't pretend that having a freaky-looking transgender person reading to my kids in the public library is good. So we do need to stand up and take a stand. And Dran and I discussed, what do we do? I think what you do is simply wonderful. And the Salt and Light Council, I have had for years, I've been a journalist for 35 years, I have had people tell me, how do we get into the churches? How do we get pastors and congregations to take this seriously? There's so many people there. There's so much commitment there. We have the news media. We have the entertainment media that are so powerful influence in society. Where the heck are the churches? And so I really do honor what you're doing with that. And the last 2 or 3 chapters in the snapping book, I'll just say, then we'll open to questions, are all about solutions. You cannot write a book about as dark stuff as this. It's all true, okay, without getting to solutions, both in the macro sense, in our country, what do we need to do, but especially I focus on the individual, the family, because that is where we have the most leverage. That is where we really do have the power to do something. And I talk a lot about, I don't have time to go through it. There's a lot. The longest chapter in the book is the what you can do chapter. But I will just mention one thing in there, because our country is getting so angry right now, is that you have to give up anger. I just read a really neat article by Franklin Graham. He wrote an article called "Do You Love Your Enemies?" And he says, quote, "As we learn to love righteousness and hate sin, we must never, ever turn to hating our fellow man." And that includes Osama bin Laden and Adolf Hitler, and however bad it is. You cannot help anything by hating. You hate the sin, but love the sinner. That is a very lovely and apt Christian phrase, and it's true, and it pretty well captures it. But there's so much anger in the country right now. We will become disabled and burn out and do stupid stuff if we fall to anger and frustration. Anger can easily turn to depression. You want to love God and love your neighbor and take a deep breath and go out there and fight the good fight. So that is one thing I talk about in the book in some detail. But there's a lot in there about what can we do to be, as you would say, salt and light, and to help ourselves and our own families, but also to fight the good fight for our country. So I'm right at 10 past here, and so I'm going to shut up. And Dran, you want to? How do
well,
you do
David, again, I'm going to go ahead and let this go just a little bit longer because we are recording. And what I'd like to do is just do a quick review of your website so that people can get connected to you? Because I think folks, as you have heard from David, in just a short period of time, he has unpacked quite a bit of what's happening in our culture. And this book and all of his books are going to set you on a great course for understanding what the actual tactics are of the left to undermine our culture. Now, when you know who the enemy is and what the enemy is doing, you have power because you can pray into that. You can pray against it and you can change it. And that's what we have to do as Salt and Light. So, David, I really appreciate what you've done and the fact that you have really put your heart and soul into this. And, you know, I got to say, it's difficult to live in this kind of information on a regular basis. So, number one, how do you do that? And number two, let's go through these number 1, 2, 3, and 4 on these pages real quick to show everybody as well.
Yeah, and just this is out of order, but I just want to say the very last chapter of the snapping book is the shortest. It's my favorite. It is completely different from the rest of the book. It is a kind of I would say it's a kind of a fresh, it's kind of my personal explanation of how I arrived at belief in God and Christianity. And it's quite entertaining. It involves a trip into outer space and then also down to the nucleus of a carbon atom. And it's quite an interesting trip. And so I don't want people to think this is a scary book. It is a redemptive book. It's frankly not anything. It's more details and some insights and connecting a lot of dots about things people don't know about. But ultimately, it is it's warm and fuzzy, and it's redemptive. This website you've got up there, the marketingofevil.com, is it's just my first book, the marketingofevil.com. It's just a web page that has all of my books. There are audiobook versions of all of them and ebook versions, and you can click on them and read about them. And that's just a good, under one roof place to kind of see, what there is. They're all different, but basically, I've been on this journey for like 35 years trying to unpack what happened to our wonderful country. And so they're just sort of each one building on the previous one, and I think you'll like them. The Whistleblower magazine is the monthly magazine of WorldNetDaily.com. WorldNet Daily is one of the, it's been around 20 years, which is a lifetime in the internet. It's one of the really huge internet portals, news websites, and we have a monthly print magazine. And I'm the editor of it. I'm basically in charge of everything in it, and it's kind of my playground where we really look in depth into one topic. Every month is just one topic. I'll give you a sneak preview. Nobody else knows this, but the November issue coming up will be called Guilt Trip, and it's all about how the left uses guilt to manipulate people. It's not just with racism, because if you're white, you're a racist because of, white guilt and white privilege and all that nonsense, okay? But it's basically, guilt is something that is a tactic that manipulative people use all over. Men use guilt to get women to have sex with them, and I mean, all this, it is a universal tool of people that want to manipulate other people. And this is what the left does. So this is kind of an original thing. This is not the usual news magazine stuff, but that's my turf. And so I will be laying the groundwork for that. And the whole issue will be, I already have most of it put together, and it will be really quite illuminating. If you want to understand not just, there's a bunch of crazy stuff going on out there, I can't stand it. But if you want to really know why is this happening, and if you really understand why, you're in a much better position to, protect yourself, do something about it, to do good. And I just, journalism is who, what, when, where, how, why. My favorite question has always been the why. I want to understand the why. Because if you understand the why, you can do something about it.
And folks, I want to share with you, if you're looking at the screen now, Whistleblower Magazine. This magazine is excellent. You can get a year subscription. But these folks are talking about the issues 7 to 10 years in advance of what you start to see in the mainstream media. So I would suggest if you want to stay on the cutting edge, get this magazine and David Kupelian's book. And I'm not trying to sell you on it. I'm just telling you what I know to be true and how it has helped me in my Christian walk and to actually start the Salt and Light Council. If it weren't for his book, The Marketing of Evil, outlining those 12 issues that are undermining our culture and the Lord speaking deeply to my heart, what is happening? And knowing that this man is capable of articulating what we all feel, I think we have a great team here, folks. So I think I'm going to open this up to questions, but also if you're looking up here at the web, at the computer, you can have an entire archive of his articles on WorldNet Daily, and just put in his name, David Kupelian, and you'll find it. He's also on Facebook, so I really highly recommend that you put his name and like him on Facebook as well. So for those of you that have been so patient, give me a second to do this phone stuff, which I didn't do a very good job of before, but we're going to try it again. So where is it? One second, I have a lot of papers going on here. Here we go. Okay, so bear with me, folks. And hang loose, everybody. And David and Carla Dean, you two can talk amongst each other if you'd like to. And Terry, the three of us, the four of us, are capable of talking. So, Carla Dean, do you have any questions?
It's cheap.
Okay, folks, so here's how you do it. You can ask a question by either writing on, I see somebody is writing, on the little chat box, but also you can press *6. So go ahead and press *6 and you can ask a question. We have a question here from Robin Lucinda. It says, if we live in the days of Noah and Lot and where good is evil, or where evil is good, can we expect the culture to listen and be changed by us? That's the first question to you, David.
Oh, that sounded like a statement. How do we expect the culture to listen to us?
Can we expect the culture to listen to us if we're living in those days right now?
Well, in the days of Noah, 8 people were saved. I think there's better odds today. I know a lot of really good people in this country. Here's the thing. You have a lot of people who will not listen to you. But there are a lot of people who are just confused. I mentioned to you earlier that I was an idiot when I was in college. I was just a lost soul, but I grew out of it somehow. And there are a lot of people who last year were like, feeling the burn for Bernie Sanders. This Rush Limbaugh called him an aging hippie communist. Okay, some of them will outgrow it. They will say, "What was I thinking? Bernie Sanders. I liked him because he said he wanted to give me everything free college education, free this, free that. Well, of course, but I didn't understand anything. I didn't understand how the world worked, and you can't just have everything free because that's like how a 3-year-old might think. Okay." So now that I have some experience in the world and I live and I'm married and I work for a living and I pay taxes, I realize I was an idiot. So there is hope, okay? There are a lot of good people out there who are confused and they are reachable. Not everybody is a hardcore, God-hating, extreme, left-wing atheist, vagabond.
All righty. Do we have any questions? *6.
I do. Oh,
go ahead.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, this is Carla Dean. David, I want to ask a question. Could you comment a little bit about the Hezbollah and their coming into our country and what you might know, any thing about that you could share with us on the sleeper cells that they are putting over our nation. Do you have any comments on?
Are you talking about Hezbollah in particular?
Yes, I know that Mark Levin has been talking about this on his show and bringing in these sleeper groups to do more of what was done like in Las Vegas. Do you know anything, or could you comment about that and how we are facing, because many churches now are wanting to embrace the Muslim religion, many of the Christian churches?
Yeah, here's the thing. Hezbollah is just one group. Hezbollah, by the way, in Arabic means party of God. Hezbollah. These are the people that believe that they are doing God a favor when they killed the righteous. That was kind of a paraphrasing something Christ said once. The whole issue is that as the Trump administration goes and destroys ISIS, it's not only ISIS, it's the worldwide Islamic supremacist movement. Some of it is by means of jihad and violence. Some of it is just they're going to go and demographically take over the Western world as they are in Europe. They do not have to have any terror attacks for Islam to take over Europe, because Europe is a post-Christian part of the world now, and they've given up the glory of civilization, their Christian heritage, and they live in their self-hatred and guilt, and now they're welcoming in people who are dedicated to destroying them. That is the absolute reality of what's happening in the United Kingdom and in Europe. And so we are not so far along in this country. We are bigger, we're more populous, and we don't have as much of this going on. But as we destroy the caliphate of ISIS and take away their land, we drove them out of Mosul, and they're mostly out of Syria, I understand now too. What has been predicted is that they will double down on their recruitment wherever they may be holed up. They're on the internet, and they will be trying to get people to, like right now, ISIS is saying, be inspired by Stephen Paddock, the guy the Las Vegas shooter, and go and shoot people. This is in the news today. Go and just on rural roads and shoot people. Drive by, shoot them, and keep going. You won't get caught. So this is literally a God-hating, worldwide, murderous mind control cult. That is what we're talking about, okay? I don't like to mince words here, okay? And so they say, well, yeah, but not all Muslims are terrorists. Of course not. But almost all terrorists are Muslims, okay? That is simply, I'm just reporting the news here, okay? So we're not attacking all of Islam, all Muslims, but the fact is, you have this movement that is very, very big within Islam, and I don't want to get into the whole debate of is this the real Islam or is it an aberration. But that wasn't your question. That's a whole debate in itself. But basically, somebody, I'm not sure, it may have been Rabbi Daniel Lapin, a friend of mine, but somebody like that said that it takes a religion to fight a religion. And the problem is, you have these people who believe that they are going to die fighting you, and that is a true warrior. And in Europe, they're worried about, do they have enough vacation time? And do they have to work 30 hours a week, or they make it just 25 hours a week? And they're too selfish to reproduce, and because it's a lot of work to have kids. And you see what I'm saying? They are getting to where we have given up our Christian faith and our Christian walk, and that is what it takes. Historically, that is what fought off the roving hordes of Islam. And by the way, I'm not too bashful about saying Islam. My grandfather was killed. I'm a son of genocide survivors. Okay, I lost up to 100 family members on both sides of my family in the Armenian genocide, which was basically Turkish Muslims killing 1.5 million Christian Armenians. So I am not like too delicate about like saying, oh, well, but Islam is a religion of peace. Islam has not been a religion of peace for the past 14 centuries, and it doesn't show any signs of beginning now. So I'm not hating anybody. I'm not condemning anybody, but that's just the facts, and we need to face the facts, or we're not going to be able to deal with the situation that of what your question is that you just asked. If we can't face up to things, we won't be able to have, in terms of immigration, in terms of all the things that we need to do, we won't be able to deal with it if we can't face squarely what we're dealing with.
Jan, I have a question, if I may.
All of our churches and people, all of you that are in your churches, Salt and Light, you have to make sure that you toe the line in your church and for these values. We can't let the left overtake our country. All right, so would you all just check your phones and make sure you're on mute, *6, and I think, was that Malcolm that I hear?
Yeah, it was, Jan. How are you?
Hi, Malcolm. Malcolm McGough is actually, I can say this, Malcolm McCough is going to be our guest, David, next month. Malcolm has just joined with Election Integrity, part of Judicial Watch, and we're going to be talking about voter fraud in elections, but I think he has a question for you.
David, thank you very much for the presentation. It was very interesting, and pretty much what I've believed right from the beginning. 1947 was the separation of church and state, the biggest lie ever perpetrated on the American people. But I understand the principles of Saul Alinsky, and one of the main principles is to take God out of our society. And the last 70 years, the government and the liberal progressive left have done a great job in infiltrating our major sources of education for our children. That's the secular school system. I often have the answer to some of these questions, but the one question that I struggle with is how do we get back control of our school systems and our education systems, given that the majority of kids are brainwashed from the age of 3, 4 through to their college years?
Yeah, that is a very, very soulful question, because for individuals, there is a solution. You can homeschool. We homeschooled our children. We're very happy we did. And there's private Christian schools. And that is, and honestly, I'm not willing to sacrifice my kids to the beast in order to try to go in there and say, well, you kids go in there and be salt and light, and because they're going to be overwhelmed. Especially today, it just gets worse every year. However, and I understand where you're coming from, you have all these precious children that are in there, and so for their sakes, not necessarily just for your own children, because you can have a solution for your own children, but what about everybody else? And that is the most important thing. That's our next generation. I'm afraid I don't have a good answer for you, because this is part of the basically the long march through the institutions, and they rightly recognized, the left did, that the schools, along with churches and the news media, entertainment, that's where these are the thought leader institutions of the country. This is where thought and worldview is generated and inculcated. The easy answer is to say, well, get involved in your local community. I'm suspicious as to how much that does. I've done that. I mean, I used to be a local reporter. I went to all the school board meetings. They're dreadfully boring and all that, and everything is just so inbred that I don't know what the solution is there. I think competition is a great thing. School vouchers is a very, very
absolutely
right. To create a competition where it is for a large. There's actually an alternative. The kids can go to that. Every type of competitive school. If you know anything about this, they do well when they do these charter schools and so forth. There's some incredible stories, even in the midst of the inner cities there are stories of like, wow, these little kids are quoting Shakespeare, and because they had a teacher that loved them, and they weren't brainwashing them with the politically correct horror that is the the core of our culture today. So
yep.
that's the best I know is creating competition and exposing what is going on, so people are motivated. People with kids are motivated to take their kids and to search out the private schools and the charter schools and the other schools and the home schools. And also, I would say one thing is that when it comes to college, there's an enormous amount technology is doing. My son is a licensed paramedic. He went to the local community college. He's getting his nursing degree now online. His wife, and these are just kids in their 20s. She is becoming a respiratory therapist. It's all online. Does her clinicals at the local hospital. So you can get trained today thanks to like online courses, and you do not have to pay $50,000-$60,000 a year and become brainwashed in Ivy League college. So that's the other part of the upper end of the school equation, is we have to realize there are real alternatives now thanks to technology.
Yeah. David, Dran, just to follow on with that, if I may, one of the things I think Salt and Light Ministry can do very well is to come alongside churches and convince them to give up their 501c3 status, because it was in 1954, as you probably know, that they really did sell their souls for 30 pieces of silver when they were kind of shut up from the pulpit because they were now receiving federal funds, and they're afraid to speak out. And we lost the voices of our communities. The churches were the voice of the community, and we lost that because they took over 501c3. And as I travelled around the country, I did notice that many churches were saying, we don't care anymore. We're just going to give it up, and we're going to speak to the truth of what's happening in our community, which is a good thing.
Beautiful.
Well, one thing I do know along that line is that all donations to a church are still tax deductible, whether you have a 501c3 status or not. If the church is paying taxes, it would be better for all of us. So we do try, Malcolm, but we really can't.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
We can't tell the pastors anything. We're blessed if we find a citizen and a pastor that are willing participants to have a Salt and Light in the first place. And then you wind up with a wonderful meeting like this where people are actually learning the good, hard truth. We are now at 7:35. I apologize. If you could all mute your phones, those of you that did the *6. I think, David, we should let you go. And I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. It was truly very inspiring. We appreciate your time. We just appreciate you so much. I'm just grateful to have this connection with you now and connect you into our Salt and Light Ministries and the different ones around the country. So I hope that we can have you back again to have a little bit more in depth. But I really want to thank you, and I want to thank all of you out there for joining us tonight. And David, I'm going to give you the last word, and then when you're done, and if you'd like to go ahead and pray at the end of your prayer, then we'll just hit the end of the recording. And thank you so much again. God bless you so much.
Thank you, Tran. I really appreciate it. I'm honored to have been here, and I just love the Aaronic blessing. So I'll say, the Lord bless you and keep you, and make His face to shine upon you, and be gracious unto you, and give you peace. I love that. I say it every day, and I'll say it now.
Amen. Once again, folks, thank you so much for joining us, and again, thank you, David Kupelian. God bless you all, and good night.